ATA for telling my mother-in-law she's not my child's second mother? The custody papers were still warm from the printer when my mother-in-law Barbara handed them to me across my own kitchen table. "I'm filing for emergency custody," she said, her voice steady and rehearsed. "You can either agree to supervised visitation, or we can let the judge decide." My 4-year-old son Lucas was in the next room watching cartoons, completely unaware that his grandmother was trying to legally remove him from my care. My hands were shaking so badly the papers rattled, and Barbara smiled at me like she'd already won. I'd been married to Claire for 6 years, together for 9, and I thought I understood how Barbara operated. She was involved, maybe too involved, but Claire was her only child, and after Claire's dad passed away from cancer when she was 15, the two of them had formed this tight unit that I'd married into, rather than broken apart. I accepted it. Barbara had a key to our house. She came over most days. She was there when Lucas was born, stayed with us for the first month, and never really left. I told myself it was helpful, that new parents needed support, that I was lucky to have a mother-in-law who cared so much. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when caring became consuming. But at the time, I was too busy working and parenting and trying to keep my marriage intact to see the pattern forming. The first real warning sign came when Lucas was about 18 months old. I came home early from work one Thursday. I'd wrapped up a client meeting ahead of schedule and found Barbara in our living room, rocking Lucas and singing to him. Nothing unusual there. Except she was singing, "Mama loves you, yes she does, Mama's boy, Mama's special boy." I stood in the doorway, briefcase still in hand, and said, "Barbara, what are you doing?" She looked up at me with this expression of pure innocence and said, "Just singing to my baby." The possessive pronoun hung in the air between us. "He's not your baby," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "He's our son, Claire's and mine." Barbara's smile never wavered. "Of course," she said, "but I'm his grandmother, which makes him my baby too. Don't be so literal." That night, I mentioned it to Claire. She was exhausted from a double shift at the hospital where she worked as an ER nurse, and I could see her shoulders tense the moment I brought up her mother. "She was just being affectionate," Claire said. "You're overthinking it." I wanted to push back, to explain that there was something fundamentally wrong about a grandmother referring to herself as Mama to our child, but Claire's face had that closed-off look that meant the conversation was over. So I dropped it. I dropped it for months, even as Barbara's behavior escalated in small, calculated increments that I couldn't quite articulate as problems without sounding paranoid. She started keeping a full nursery at her house, not just a crib and some toys, but everything. Duplicate clothes, duplicate toys, duplicate bottles and sippy cups, and even the same brand of toothpaste we used. "So he feels at home here too," she explained when I noticed. She began taking Lucas for overnight visits, at first with our permission, then with increasingly vague requests that Claire would approve without checking with me. I'd come home to find Lucas gone, and Claire would say, "Oh, Mom wanted some grandma time." I said it was fine. It was never fine with me, but saying so made me the controlling husband who didn't want his son to have a relationship with his grandmother. The second major incident happened on a Saturday morning in early spring. Lucas was 2.5, verbal enough to repeat things he heard, but not sophisticated enough to understand context. We were eating breakfast when he looked at me and said, "Gamma Barb says she's my real mommy." I nearly dropped my coffee. Claire, who'd been scrolling through her phone, looked up sharply. "What?" Lucas, oblivious to the grenade he'd just thrown, continued eating his cereal. "Gamma Barb says Mommy works too much and Gamma Barb is the real mommy who takes care of me." The words were clearly parroted, too complex for a toddler to formulate, and my blood went cold. Claire called her mother immediately, put her on speaker. "Mom, did you tell Lucas you're his real mother?" Barbara's laugh tinkled through the phone. "Oh, Claire, don't be ridiculous. I said I'm like a mother to him. He must have misunderstood." Claire accepted this explanation. I didn't. I started paying closer attention to what Lucas said after visits with Barbara, and a disturbing pattern emerged. "Gamma Barb says Daddy is too strict. Gamma Barb says I can have candy whenever I want at her house. Gamma Barb says she wishes I lived with her all the time." Each statement was carefully designed to undermine our authority and position Barbara as the preferred parent. When I compiled a list and showed it to Claire, she got defensive. "She's just being a grandmother. They spoil kids. It's what they do." But this wasn't spoiling. This was systematic replacement. I started documenting everything in a journal. Dates, times, verbatim quotes from Lucas, screenshots of text messages where Barbara would change plans without asking or show up unannounced. My buddy Keith from law school had become a family attorney, and over drinks one evening in June, I asked him hypothetically what someone should do if a grandparent was overstepping. Keith got this look on his face, serious and concerned, and said, "How bad is it?" I showed him my documentation. He read through it without speaking, then looked at me and said, "This isn't overstepping. This is parental alienation. And if she's as organized as you say, she might be building a case for grandparents' rights or trying to establish herself as a psychological parent." The term psychological parent was new to me. Keith explained, in some states, if a non-parent can prove they've functioned as a child's primary caregiver and the child views them as a parent, They can petition for custody or visitation rights. But that's insane, I said. I'm his father. I live with him. I take care of him. Keith nodded. I know. But courts look at patterns of care. If she can show she's been consistently involved in day-to-day parenting, that your wife has facilitated this relationship, and that separating them would harm Lucas, she might have a case. I went home that night, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. I tried again to talk to Claire, showed her Keith's concerns, begged her to see what was happening. She looked at my documentation like it was evidence of my paranoia rather than her mother's manipulation. You're keeping a journal about my mother like she's a criminal, Claire said, her voice rising. This is obsessive. You need to stop. I couldn't stop. The situation was accelerating. Barbara started picking Lucas up from daycare on days we hadn't authorized. The staff let her because she was his grandmother and seemed perfectly trustworthy. She took him to doctor's appointments without asking, then justified it by saying Claire had been too busy to schedule them. She bought him a tablet, expensive, top of the line, and set it up with her own Apple ID so she could monitor his usage and approve apps. For safety, she said. She began posting photos of Lucas on Facebook with captions like, my boy, and best part of my day, and what I live for. When I asked her to stop, she said she had the same right to share photos as any proud grandmother. Technically true, contextually horrifying. The breaking point came on a Sunday in mid-July. Claire was working an overnight shift, and I had planned a whole day with Lucas. Zoo, lunch, playground, ice cream, father-son bonding. I woke up at 8 to get him ready and his bed was empty. The panic was immediate and visceral. I ran through the house calling his name. Nothing. His shoes were gone. His favorite jacket was gone. I called Claire, trying not to sound hysterical. Is Lucas with your mom? Claire, groggy from trying to sleep during the day, said, What? No. Why would he be? I found the note on the kitchen counter, tucked under a coffee mug. Took Elle to the aquarium. Didn't want to wake you. Back this afternoon. B. She'd used her key to enter our house while I was sleeping and taken my son. I called her cell. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, Bring him back now. No response. I drove to her house. Empty. I called Claire back and said, Your mother took Lucas without permission while I was asleep. She's not answering her phone. This is kidnapping. Claire's voice got sharp. Don't be dramatic. She's his grandmother. She probably wanted to give you a break. The word dramatic hit me like a slap. My son had been removed from our home without consent, and I was being dramatic for caring. I hung up and called Keith. I need a lawyer, I said. Not you, someone who does custody. I need to know my rights, because I think this just became a legal situation. Keith gave me the name Thomas Garrett, an attorney who'd been practicing family law for 25 years and had handled numerous grandparents' rights cases. I left a message with Garrett's office and then sat in my car outside Barbara's empty house, shaking with adrenaline and rage, waiting for my son to come back. They returned at 4 in the afternoon. Lucas was sunburned and exhausted, chattering about the fish and the touch tanks and the special lunch Gamma Barb had bought him. Barbara looked at me with this expression of mild surprise, like she couldn't imagine why I'd be upset. We had such a wonderful time, she said. You should thank me for giving you the morning to sleep in. I didn't yell. I wanted to, but Lucas was standing right there, looking confused by the tension he could feel, but not understand. I said very calmly, You will never take my son without explicit permission again. If you do, I will call the police. Barbara's expression hardened. You can't keep me from him. Claire would never allow it. She was right, and we both knew it. When Claire came home that evening, tired and stressed from her shift, I explained what had happened. She sighed like I'd told her about a minor inconvenience rather than a massive boundary violation. She should have asked, Claire admitted, but she was trying to be nice. Why do you always assume the worst about her? Thomas Garrett called me back Monday morning. I took a personal day from work and met him at his office, a professional space with law degrees from University of Michigan and 25 years' worth of family law experience displayed on the walls. He was in his early 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of calm competence that made you feel like your problems were solvable. I told him everything. He listened, took detailed notes, and when I finished, he said, Your instincts are correct. What you're describing is a pattern of parental alienation with a grandparent as the alienating party. It's less common than parent versus parent alienation, but it happens, and it can be devastating if not addressed. What do? I asked. Garrett laid it out. Document everything, get Claire into therapy, both couples counseling and individual, establish firm boundaries with Barbara immediately, and be prepared for legal action, because based on what I'd described, Barbara was likely already preparing her own case. Can she actually get custody? The question made my throat tight. In most jurisdictions, grandparents have limited rights, Garrett said. But if she can prove she's been functioning as a primary caregiver, that Lucas has formed a significant attachment to her, and that your family unit is unstable, she could get court-ordered visitation. In extreme cases, if she can prove parental unfitness, she could get more. I left his office with a strategy and a knot of dread in my stomach. I needed Claire on my side, and I wasn't sure I had her anymore. That evening, I broached the subject of therapy. To my surprise, Claire agreed immediately. Fine, she said. If it'll prove you're overreacting, fine. We started seeing Dr. Jennifer Moss the following week, a clinical psychologist with a PhD from Stanford and 30 years of experience in family systems therapy. Our first session, Dr. Moss asked us each to describe the problem from our perspective. I laid out the facts, the boundary violations, the real mommy comments, the unauthorized activities, the systematic undermining of our parental authority. Claire countered. I was jealous of her mother's bond with Lucas, controlling about how much time they spent together, and unable to accept help. Dr. Moss listened without judgment, making notes in a leather journal. Then she asked Claire a question that changed the trajectory of everything. If your mother disappeared tomorrow, how would your life be different? Claire's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, fear, something that looked almost like panic, before she whispered, I don't know. I've never thought about it. Dr. Moss nodded slowly. That's what we need to explore, because healthy family relationships should be able to withstand that thought experiment. The fact that you can't imagine your life without your mother's constant presence suggests something more complex than normal family closeness. Over the next 2 months of weekly therapy sessions, a picture emerged that I'd only partially understood. Claire's relationship with Barbara wasn't just close, it was enmeshed to the point of codependency. Barbara had raised Claire to believe she was incapable of functioning without maternal guidance. After Claire's father died, instead of helping Claire process that grief and develop independence, Barbara had clung tighter, making herself indispensable. Claire had never lived alone. She'd gone from her mother's house to college dorms, where Barbara visited every single weekend, to moving in with me, and Barbara had a key from day one of our lease. Dr. Moss used clinical terms, enmeshment, emotional parentification, anxious attachment. Claire cried through most of those sessions, processing a childhood she'd never questioned. Slowly, painfully, Claire started setting boundaries, small ones at first, asking Barbara to call before coming over, saying no to unscheduled overnight visits, taking back control of Lucas's medical appointments and daycare schedule. Barbara's response was immediate and calculated. She started calling Claire 10, 15 times a day, crying about feeling rejected and abandoned. She showed up at our house unannounced, claiming she was worried because we weren't responding to her messages fast enough. She sent long text messages, I'm talking paragraphs, essays, about how ungrateful Claire was, how I was poisoning her against her own mother, how she was going to lose her grandson because of my toxic influence. Dr. Moss warned us this would happen. When you change the dynamics of an enmeshed relationship, the other person experiences it as abandonment or betrayal, she explained. They'll escalate to try to pull you back in. You need to hold firm. Claire tried. She really tried. But every boundary she set was met with Barbara's tears, guilt trips, and increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control. And then, in late August, Barbara made her play. I came home from work on a Friday afternoon. It was about 3:30, I remember checking my watch, and saw a police cruiser in our driveway. Officer Ramsey was standing on our porch with Barbara beside him, and the expression on Barbara's face was pure calculated concern. My heart started pounding before I even got out of my car. Can I help you? I asked, trying to sound calm. Officer Ramsey, a veteran cop probably in his mid-40s with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much, said, Sir, we received a report of potential child endangerment at this address. I need to ask you some questions. The world tilted. Child endangerment? From who? I looked at Barbara. She had tears in her eyes. Perfect tears, just enough to be believable. And she said, I'm sorry. I didn't want it to come to this. But someone has to protect Lucas. Officer Ramsey asked where my son was. I told him Lucas was at daycare, showed him the pickup schedule on my phone. The officer asked to come inside. I let him in, my hands shaking, while Barbara stood there radiating false concern. I've seen bruises, Barbara told the officer, multiple times, and he's left alone for hours. I've documented everything. She pulled out her phone, started showing Officer Ramsey photos. Lucas with a scraped knee from falling off his bike. Lucas with a bruise on his shin from running into a coffee table. Normal childhood injuries, decontextualized and presented as evidence of abuse. These are from normal kid accidents, I said, hearing my voice rise despite my best efforts to stay calm. He's 4 years old. He falls down. He runs into things. That's what kids do. Officer Ramsey's expression was neutral, professional, but I could see the suspicion forming. Barbara kept talking, her voice breaking in all the right places. And he's so thin. I don't think he's being fed properly. And the emotional abuse? He's scared all the time. The lies were so brazen, so complete, that I actually laughed. Wrong move. Laughing made me look unstable. Officer Ramsey asked where my wife was. I gave him Claire's cell number. He stepped outside to call her. I stood in my own living room with my mother-in-law and felt reality fracturing around me. Why are you doing this? I asked. Barbara's mask slipped for just a second. I saw calculation in her eyes, a quick assessment of whether she'd overplayed her hand. Then the tears were back. I'm trying to protect my grandson from you. Someone has to. Claire arrived 15 minutes later, still in her scrubs, hair pulled back, looking exhausted and confused and terrified. Officer Ramsey explained that there'd been a report of child endangerment. Claire looked at her mother, and I watched the realization crash over her face like cold water. "Mom," she said, her voice barely audible. "What did you do?" Barbara tried the same performance, the tears, the concern, the claims about bruises and neglect. But Claire had been in therapy for 2 months. She'd been doing the work to see her mother clearly. She turned to Officer Ramsey and said, firmly and clearly, "My mother is lying. My husband is a good father. There is no abuse. What you're witnessing is a family conflict that my mother is trying to weaponize." Officer Ramsey looked between the three of us, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. He asked to see Lucas when he came home from daycare. He asked to examine our home. He took notes and photos and said someone from Child Protective Services would be following up. The moment Officer Ramsey left, Claire turned to her mother with a fury I'd never seen before. "Get out," she said. "Get out of our house and don't come back." Barbara tried to cry, tried to guilt, tried every manipulation in her arsenal. Claire stood firm. "You called the police on my husband, on my son's father. You made false accusations of child abuse. There is no coming back from this. Get out." Barbara's expression shifted from grief to rage in a heartbeat. The mask finally fell completely. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You can't keep him from me. I have rights. I'll get a lawyer and you'll see. Lucas belongs with someone who actually loves him." Then she left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the walls. The CPS investigation was a waking nightmare. A social worker named Angela Foster showed up the following Monday, a woman in her late 30s with kind eyes and a clipboard full of invasive questions. She interviewed Claire and me separately, examined every room in our house, looked through Lucas's toys, his clothes, his medical records, talked to our neighbors about us, asked Lucas in age-appropriate language about his home life. I felt stripped naked, every aspect of my life scrutinized by a stranger who had the power to destroy my family based on one vindictive woman's lies. But Angela was thorough and fair. She saw through Barbara's accusations. 2 weeks later, she called to tell us the case was closed. No evidence of abuse or neglect. We were cleared. I wanted to feel relief. Instead, I felt rage. Barbara had weaponized the system designed to protect children, had knowingly filed a false report, had put Lucas through the trauma of seeing police at his house and being questioned by a social worker, all because we dared to set boundaries. Thomas Garrett advised us to pursue a restraining order and to be prepared for Barbara to file her own legal action. "She's not going to stop," he said. "People like this don't stop. They escalate." We gathered evidence: the false police report, text message harassment, social media posts where Barbara referred to Lucas as "my baby boy" and herself as his real mother, testimony from Dr. Moss about the psychological harm Barbara's behavior was causing our family. We filed for a restraining order in early September. The hearing was scheduled for mid-October. In the meantime, we changed our locks, changed our phone numbers, blocked Barbara on every social media platform, told Lucas's daycare that only Claire and I were authorized for pickup. We thought we'd contained it. We were wrong. Barbara hired a lawyer, a shark named David Thornton, who specialized in grandparents' rights cases. In late September, we were served with Barbara's counterpetition. She was seeking court-ordered visitation, claiming she'd been a de facto parent to Lucas since birth, and that denying her access was causing him psychological harm. The legal battle that consumed the next 2 months was brutal. Depositions where Thornton tried to paint me as a controlling, abusive husband. Interrogatories demanding our financial records, work schedules, parenting decisions. Discovery requests for text messages, emails, social media posts. Thornton was good at his job, and his job was to destroy our credibility. He portrayed Barbara as a devoted grandmother who'd stepped up when working parents couldn't provide adequate care. He portrayed me as a jealous husband who'd alienated my wife from her support system. He had witnesses, neighbors who'd seen Barbara at our house regularly, daycare workers who confirmed she did frequent pickups, even Lucas's pediatrician who testified that Barbara had brought him to several appointments. Everything Thornton presented was technically accurate but stripped of context. Yes, Barbara had been at our house regularly because she had a key and showed up uninvited. Yes, she did daycare pickups, unauthorized ones. Yes, she'd attended medical appointments, after making them without our knowledge. Thomas Garrett cross-examined each witness brilliantly, getting them to admit they'd never witnessed actual abuse, that they had no direct knowledge of our family dynamics, that Barbara's involvement had decreased significantly in recent months because we'd set boundaries. The hearing in mid-October felt like a performance where our entire lives were on trial. Barbara testified first, crying on cue, talking about her deep love for Lucas and how devastating it was to be cut off from him. She had prepared remarks that sounded almost believable if you didn't know the truth. Then Garrett cross-examined her. He got her to admit she'd called police with false allegations. Got her to admit she'd referred to herself as Lucas's real mother. Got her to admit she'd taken Lucas from our home without permission. Every admission made her look less like a concerned grandmother and more like what she was, someone trying to appropriate our child. Claire testified next. My wife, who'd spent 28 years under her mother's control, stood in that courtroom and told the truth. She described the enmeshment, the codependency, the fear she'd lived with without naming it. She explained how therapy had helped her recognize that her mother's love was conditional on obedience. She looked at Barbara directly and said, "I know you think you're doing this because you love him, but you're hurting him. You're hurting all of us. And I can't let you continue." Barbara's composure finally cracked. The mask slipped. She looked at Claire with pure rage and hissed, "You ungrateful bitch." The court reporter's fingers flew across her machine, recording those words for the official record. I testified last. Walked the judge through the timeline, the escalating boundary violations, the systematic attempt to replace us as Lucas's parents. Showed the documentation I'd been keeping for over a year, dozens of incidents, hundreds of text messages, a clear pattern of behavior. Thomas walked me through it methodically, building not just a case against Barbara's petition, but for the restraining order we'd requested. The judge was a woman named Patricia Hayes, probably in her early 60s, with sharp eyes and an expression that gave away nothing. When we finished, she said she'd issue a written ruling within 30 days. Those 30 days were agony. We tried to maintain normalcy for Lucas, who asked occasionally why he didn't see Grandma Barbara anymore. We told him that sometimes grown-ups have disagreements and need space, trying to keep it age-appropriate while being honest. We continued therapy. We waited. And on November 15th, Thomas called with the ruling. Judge Hayes had denied Barbara's petition for visitation and granted our restraining order. Barbara was prohibited from contacting us, coming within 1,000 feet of our home or Lucas's daycare, or posting about us on social media for a period of 5 years. Judge Hayes's written opinion was devastating to Barbara's case. She called the behavior a clear pattern of parental alienation and boundary violation, and noted that a grandparent's affection, however genuine, does not entitle them to override parental authority, make false accusations to law enforcement, or claim parental status over a child who has two loving, capable parents. The restraining order included a provision that any violation would result in immediate arrest and potential criminal charges. We won. Legally, completely, we won. But victory felt hollow. Claire was grieving the loss of the mother she'd always wished Barbara could be. I was exhausted from months of legal warfare and emotional manipulation. Lucas still asked about Grandma sometimes, and we had to navigate how to explain that some people love you in broken ways without making him feel responsible. Dr. Moss told us healing would take time, that family trauma doesn't resolve with a judge's signature, and she was right. 4 months later, March, early spring, life had started to feel normal again. Claire was stronger, healthier, more able to make decisions without the constant weight of her mother's expectations. Lucas had stopped asking about Barbara and seemed genuinely happier with the consistency and clarity we'd established. I'd stopped checking over my shoulder constantly, stopped jumping when the doorbell rang. We were healing, slowly and imperfectly, but healing. Then I got a LinkedIn message from a journalist named Rachel Kim, who was working on an article about grandparents' rights and family estrangement. She'd found our case through public records and wanted to interview us. I almost deleted it, but I called Thomas first. "Talk to her," he advised. "Barbara's been telling her version to anyone who'll listen. Time for the truth to have a platform." So I met Rachel at a coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon. She was in her early 30s, professional, with a recording device and intelligent questions that showed she'd done her research. I told her everything. She took detailed notes, asked for clarification, and at the end said, "I'm sorry you went through this, but I think your story could help other families recognize these patterns before they escalate." The article published online in April with the headline, "When Love Becomes Control, A Family's Battle Against Grandparent Alienation." Rachel had interviewed Dr. Moss, Thomas Garrett, even Angela Foster, the CPS worker who'd investigated us and confirmed finding no evidence of abuse. She'd contacted Barbara's lawyer for comment. Thornton had provided a statement calling the article a biased and one-sided attack on a grandmother who simply loves her grandson. The article went viral. Within a week, it had been shared tens of thousands of times. We got messages from other families dealing with similar situations, from therapists who specialized in enmeshed family systems, from lawyers who handled grandparents' rights cases. The comments were divided. Some people sympathized with us, others accused us of being cruel to an elderly woman who just loved her grandchild. But the exposure did something important. It broke Barbara's narrative. She couldn't claim to be a victim anymore when the facts were publicly documented. Barbara violated the restraining order 6 weeks after the article published. She showed up at Lucas's daycare during pickup time, apparently thinking she could blend into the crowd of parents. The daycare director recognized her from the photo we'd provided and immediately called the police. Barbara was arrested, spent a night in jail, and had her restraining order extended to 10 years. At the violation hearing, her lawyer argued that she just wanted to see her grandson. That maternal instinct had overridden her judgment. Judge Hayes was unmoved. "Your client was explicitly ordered to stay away. She chose to violate that order. This court takes such violations seriously. Actions have consequences." Now, 18 months after that Friday afternoon when Barbara brought police to our door, life is different, quieter. Lucas is 5 and thriving, with no memory of calling anyone his real mother except Claire, and a healthy understanding that grandparents are important, but they're not parents. Claire is in the best mental health of her adult life, still in therapy, but doing the deep work to build an identity separate from her mother's expectations. We're stronger as a couple because we fought for the same thing instead of against each other. We protected our family. Together. I think about Barbara sometimes. Wonder if she understands what she lost, if she's capable of that kind of self-reflection, or if she's still telling herself she was the victim in all of this. I don't hate her. Hate requires too much energy, and I've spent enough energy on her. What I feel is something closer to pity, mixed with firm resolve. She could have been a wonderful grandmother if she'd been willing to respect boundaries, but she couldn't love Lucas without trying to own him, and that's the tragedy no court order can fix. The restraining order wasn't what I wanted when this started. What I wanted was a grandmother who understood that Claire and I are Lucas's parents, who respected our authority, who loved our son without trying to replace us. But you can't negotiate with someone who believes their love entitles them to anything they want. You can't compromise with someone who sees boundaries as a tax. And you can't reason with someone who's built their entire identity around a relationship with a child who isn't theirs. Dr. Moss told us in one of our recent sessions that healthy relationships require what she calls differentiation, the ability to be emotionally close while maintaining separate identities and boundaries. Barbara couldn't differentiate. She saw Claire as an extension of herself and Lucas as her second chance at motherhood. When we tried to establish ourselves as an independent family unit, she experienced it as abandonment and attacked. That's not love. That's possession. And I'd fight that battle 100 times over to protect my son from being someone's emotional replacement. Someone at work asked me recently if I regretted how hard I fought, if maybe I should have tried harder to find a middle ground. I told them what I've come to understand. There is no middle ground with someone who thinks they own your child. Peace without boundaries isn't peace. It's surrender. And I wasn't willing to surrender my son's childhood, my marriage, or my role as his father to someone who thought loving him meant controlling him. The truth is simple. I told my mother-in-law she wasn't my child's second mother, and she tried to destroy me for it. She failed. We're still here, still together, still building the life we chose, and she's living with the consequences of confusing love with ownership. That's justice enough. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.